I have always rather liked this phrase. It's to do with discovery, but I think it's equally applicable to creativity. That it consists of seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody has thought before. And I'm going to say creativity occurs when people generate ideas that change their world. My granddaughter is now 5 years old, and I've been watching her grow up. Every day she has a thought that leads to an action which is a little bit different than before. In other words, every day she thinks something or generates an idea that changes her world. Now, to me, that is not a trivial function. That means everybody was creative. The process of growing up and learning becomes creative. It is inherently creative. I'm not saying we're all equally creative. Thus, when studying creativity, maybe we need to recognize it as a social phenomenon. First, understand that before we turn the microscope on individuals. Because over the last 100, 150 years that people have been studying creativity from the individually based perspective, we have really uncovered remarkably little. Things like we need to be motivated. Well, anybody eminent, whether they're creative or not, needs to get up in the morning. So really, the individual study of creativity, I don't believe, has been terribly successful. And maybe we will end up studying what suppresses creativity, why our 9-year-old suddenly becomes, or becomes in the course of socialization, not so creative. Humans are a mass of contradictions. We spend our lives having certain goals and taking actions that do not appear to be moving in that direction. There is a particular contradiction that I want to focus on right now. All human beings have a major need for connectedness with others. We need to be part of groups. Maybe you'll share with us a few of the groups that you belong to.
Family, university, friends, hopefully.
Okay. Would you share with us some of your groups?
Professional colleagues, animals.
Right. Thank you very much. That's the penalty for sitting in front, by the way. Okay, so we have family, we have work, we have friends, school, church, recreation, just a few, and I'm sure you can add at least 1,000 more. One of the things that happens when people are put in a situation of fear is that they tend to become much closer to their groups. They tend to identify more with their in-groups. And after the terror of September 11, 2001, millions of US flags started to appear on people's porches, on their car antennae, and that was a clear indication that people were associating more closely with the group, their nation. Okay, so groups can be very, very small. They can be just 2 people, or in fact they can be millions of people, nearly all of whom we don't know. They can perhaps be the 2,000 friends that one of my students claims to have on Facebook. So these can all be our in-group. So when we're associating with our in-groups in any way, whatever, it is our similarity with others that becomes important to us. That's the salient issue. And these are not trivial. I mean, our group memberships are absolutely vital. If you deprive people of their ability to have group memberships, they will not remain stable for very long. This is solitary confinement, probably one of the worst of all punishments that you can dole out to somebody. Maslow considered the importance of this group connection as second only to our need for food and water. In amongst this mass of contradictions, we have also got the need to be, and to be seen to be, unique, to have our own degree of novelty. The inability to demonstrate uniqueness also has negative consequences for well-being. The display of uniqueness is, of course, the display of our creativity. This is the area where creativity comes from. Otto Rank, back in the 1800s, considered that our display of creativity, this display of uniqueness, was also an attempt to gain immortality. But in this particular case, it's not our similarity with others that we're focusing on, it is our difference from others. These are two opposing drives, and they cannot happen simultaneously. We cannot have salient our difference from others and our similarity with others at the same time. I consider this to be one end of a continuum. They may not be quite the same dimension, but for all intents and purposes, I believe that we have the need for group affiliation, our similarity to others at one end, and then we have the need to display our uniqueness. This is the difference from others at the other end. The implications from this are that we have to depart from the comfort of the group in order to maximize our creative potential. Any force that's in the direction of connectedness is the force against the motivation to create. I mentioned the horrors of 9/11 a little bit earlier. There is quite a bit of evidence that overall in the US, creativity actually went down after 9/11. There's clear implications for this theory with regard to the current trend for teams. Team building, as you know, has been the buzzword of the business profession for 20, 30 years. And there is also evidence that creativity in an organizational setting has not been improved by the use of teams. Innovation, yes. Actual generation of novel ideas, not so much. And of course, brainstorming. Brainstorming is inherently, the way it is traditionally performed, a team activity. And the fathers of brainstorming put a lot of effort into trying to discover why a group of people sent off to ideate individually would come up with more unique ideas than when they sat round a table to do it in a brainstorming format. And that research, although people try and find excuses why it wasn't quite right, that has been conducted in the East, in the West, in large groups, in small groups, and it seems to be difficult to disprove. It gives you some idea of perhaps why brainstorming as a group is not terribly effective. So all is not lost. I mean, I'm not team bashing by any stretch of the imagination, and neither am I trying to ditch brainstorming as an extraordinarily useful tool. But what needs to happen, I think, is that within the notion of brainstorming or teamwork, there has to be space for individual activity. And now, when I conduct brainstorming sessions, the actual ideation portion of the brainstorming, I have people disappear in all different directions, not even in the same room as other people. So successful innovation requires both the space for individuality and the facility to cooperate as a team. Unfortunately, there really isn't any consensus with regard to creativity and innovation or inventiveness. There are all sorts of different ways in which these words are used. So in my book, creativity is the generation of a unique, novel idea. I personally am not even concerned about its usefulness at this point. It's generated by a single individual. The germ is an individually based thing. The unique idea comes from somebody. So when everyone's sitting around a table with their own little ideas, somebody will say, yes, that's mine. By the time you get to the end of the process, you may not be able to identify who came up with the original germ, but that doesn't matter. We're not awarding prizes here. That germ came from an individual. And my belief is that original germ will stand a better chance of being unique if it is generated by an individual in relative isolation. So innovation is what happens after that creative germ is born. And that's really where you need all the skills. And it may be an iterative process. There may be a lot of creativity in the development from the initial germ to the final result. At the bottom of the last slide, I put in requires skills such as interpersonal communication. Okay, that's something that I don't think is discussed in the world of creativity and innovation nearly enough. The world is replete with engineers with great ideas who are unable to discuss them in a convincing and fluid fashion in such that anybody listens to them. I used to be an engineer before a psychologist, by the way, so I have seen that in practice. I'm not going to discuss the studies in detail. Mark was kind enough to publish one of these relatively recently. In the studies, I vary a number of different factors. These are basically group organizational kind of settings. The ones I'm describing are experimental, although I have done some field work also. One of the things I vary is collectivist versus individualist norms within the groups. Because the principle is, if you have a group, an organization, the norms of which are individualist, in other words, the individual is expected to strive for their own personal benefit rather than the benefit of the group, the idea would be that you are then tempting people to the left-hand side of my continuum. In other words, you're not connecting them with the group, you're connecting them with their own personal interest. So I also varied threat. So one group was under threat, competitive threat. If they didn't get the job done, their company might not be there tomorrow, or not under competitive threat. I controlled for affect. In other words, I measured people's well-being in the course of all this. And I did analyze by gender for various reasons I won't bore you with just at the moment. What I found was that organizational norms do shape the level of creativity of individuals within that organization. So individualist organizations did produce a significantly higher degree of creativity than organizations that had a more collectivist approach. Positive affect is associated with positive creativity. This, in all my studies, this came through as a significant factor. So let's all be happy and we'll be more creative. An emphasis on individuality helps increase creative output in general, despite the overall organizational norm. Under competitive threat, the salience of the problem solution to survival may be critical. This is a little bit to one side of what I'm talking about, but basically, if your organization is under threat and people are aware that what they're doing might mitigate that threat, in other words, they're totally aware what they're working on might help the company survive, then they will be more creative. If, however, you give them a problem that is nothing to do, or you don't tell them that it's anything to do with the survival of the organization, then the threat will suppress the creativity. They will be less creative. So there are several models that I also won't bore you with as to what might potentially happen to creativity under threat. But that's what I found happened in practice. So basically, if you're really struggling and you need people to be creative for the survival of the company, you need to let them know that. Further thoughts, I mentioned this very briefly before. I have people come together for the problem identification. I send people apart for the individual brainstorming. We regroup for idea sharing. And this may be an iterative process. So even when we're using teams especially for product development, but anyway, we need to leave plenty of room for individual creative contributions. Toyota's very good at that. In loose teams, we need to emphasize group goals. We need to keep focused on the direct and positive contribution of creative products and maintain positive affect. Okay? If you are interested, I've got just published a book which has a lot more information in it.